let's go to Professor Ray Jones, a former Director of Social Services in Wiltshire. Ray, good afternoon. Thank you for joining Talk Drive. How are you?
OK.
Let's start with what that man said that millions of people today will be saying across the country. We heard today that people are about to be prosecuted for the heinous crimes against the post office. All those poor people who went through years of hell. Finally, we might find that police officers and members of the, I don't know, House of Commons, politicians, whatever, could be prosecuted. That man's just said it. How many more Victoria Columbiers? How many more Sara Sharifs? How many more baby Ps before... not ex-colleagues of yours, but people in social services and people who... I mean, there's nobody that can defend the fact that this was... I mean, astonishingly, social services didn't look into this family man. They need to be prosecuted, these people, don't they?
Well, if you take that line, I think most of us will be off the pitch. I was a social services director for... I said, if you take that line of wanting to sack everybody when something awful happens, most of us will be off the pitch. And I'll tell you why.
Hold on one second. Sorry. Off the pitch?
No. You've invited me on your programme. Let me tell you why. I was a social services director for 14 years. I've been a social worker for 52 years. And during that time, children have died that I have known. Children have died who my colleagues have known when I was a director of social services. People were doing the best with the information that they had and the time that they had. Now, one of the things that you need to face up to, is that in the last 14 years, children's social services in this country have been cut back year on year on year. Police have withdrawn from the community. We don't have community policing now because of cuts within policing. You know what's happening in terms of the health service and the difficulties of doing the job there. So the context in which people are trying to do a really difficult, challenging job, often without all the information that becomes available later on. If you want to take them off the pitch, it's not going to be the solution.
Right. This is not personal, but it's going to become personal. Not against you. It's because I'm a father. And I'll tell you what I don't agree with what you've just said. I absolutely guarantee, and I knew and I understand, 14 years of Tory austerity, there are less social workers, there are less police. I rail against that every day. But do me a favour, Professor Ray Jones. If you want to sack people, they won't be on the pitch. Then the team's not good enough. Let me ask you. You said you did this 52 years. You said you were a director for 14 years. Are you ready for this? Neighbours, don't tell me about information afterwards. Neighbours heard gut-wrenching screams from the home and reported to social services for 2.5 years. Concerned teachers recorded seeing bruises on this poor little mite's body and told social services over 2.5 years. Police were called and social services, astonishingly, did nothing. Now, I know, and I mean this with my hand on my heart, that social services do an amazing amount of work, but you cannot in any way tell me that that is not the most awful incompetence. That's not based on not having information or hours. That is based on complete incompetence. And I'll go further. The people that didn't look into this girl's death have blood on their hands, Ray. 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%.
You know the story. You know the details of this story. You've been all over it, I guess. So you will know that this child was returned to her father's care through the courts. So whatever the courts were presented with at that time...
By social services. Services.
The courts are an adversarial process, if you understand it. So there will be a whole range of things. Look, you called me, you asked me to be on your programme.
I know, but that's pretty condescending to say if I understand it.
Let me finish.
Isn't it?
Mr. Carl, you asked me to be on your programme. Let me finish my sentence, if you would. So the people who had the information at the time from a range of sources took that decision. Now we know something absolutely awful, horrific has happened.
And you don't think the social services should have known about that?
And it had been happening for some time as well. So quite rightly and appropriately and necessarily, that story will be brought together in terms of putting together all the information that's available. Then you can make the judgment that you are jumping to at the moment.
I don't think it's a judgment. All right, okay.
There must have been a lack of care.
No.
There must have been a lack of...
Well, hold on a second. You're making... But hold on a second. This is the bit I don't understand. Forgive me. I'm not being rude. I'm trying to get to this. You've talked about 14 years of political failure. You've talked about not enough police. You've talked about the judges system. But you won't answer the simple question. If I rang you 5 times and told you as my social worker in the area that my next door next-door neighbour. They were heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching screams from a child. And then at some point later, you'd investigated and you decided that wasn't happening, or you hadn't looked into it. Would you be in front of me making the excuses you are now for your colleagues? I would be saying to you...
I will tell you, when you finish your rant, I will tell you what I would have done. I would have been out there trying to find out what was going on within that family. I would have been speaking to the neighbours, trying to build up that picture. I would have been contacting the police and trying to get the information from them. I would have been contacting the GP, the school. I would have been trying to build that picture. And if the picture is, as we now understand that it is and was, then clearly there are significant concerns about why action wasn't taken. But we have to allow that picture now to be built up in terms of what was known at the time, what was known at the time, and what people did with the information they had at the time.
Well, that's the point. So how, as a man with all your experience, and you've just said exactly what anybody would say, quite rightly, you'd have done the job. You must surmise by that there has been a gargantuan failure on social services in terms of how they dealt with this, yes or no?
Well, the point I've made several times, and maybe you're not listening to, by putting that information, I know, do you want to hear this?
Yeah.
By putting that information together in terms of what was known at the time, not what's known now, what was known at the time by different people, how well they shared that information, how well they built the picture up. When you have that information in front of you, make the judgment that you're now making and which you're jumping to.
Why you keep saying I'm jumping? Why can't you say social services in this area failed that young child who is dead, who was beaten to a pulp for 2.5 years by, actually, this isn't your bag, a man who shouldn't even have been in this bloody country but managed to do what they usually do and allow that person to stay. That's another thing. But there were so many missed opportunities. So many neighbours rang, not you, but your colleagues, social services. So the police, school teachers, you're talking about building a picture. What bloody bigger picture did these people need to save this girl's life? Come on, that's not unreasonable, Ray.
What is unreasonable is jumping to the judgment and the conclusion and the actions that you want taken at this point in time. When you don't have the full story, I don't have the full story needs to be pulled together. I totally agree with you. This is absolutely horrific. But if the response is, let's sack the people who were involved, let's get them, as I say, off the pitch, then what we're going to do is create a situation where no one's going to come into this service, no one's going to come into this job. I'm talking about police officers here, I'm talking about paediatricians, I'm talking about health visitors, I'm talking about social workers. People are going to be told you're fired just because something terrible happened and you didn't stop it. When you didn't have
that's
all
like
the
any
information
job.
at
Forget
that
the
point
news.
in
I'm going to
time.
carry on. Sorry, but that's the forget the news. Go and get the bosses. I don't care. So how does that work? You're saying to me...
How it works is because you don't have the full story at the moment. I don't have the full story.
But those social workers were told by neighbours that this child was screaming.
You have bits of the story at the moment. Pull the story together. Find out what was known to the police, what was known to social workers at the time, how they made the judgments they made, what was said in terms of from the schools. I totally agree with you. That if you look at it as it is at the moment, this is absolutely awful and outrageous. I totally agree with you.
Thank you for coming on the show, Ray. Don't think me rude. I've got to move. I have to go.
What I'm holding back on is making that judgment that you've already jumped to. Make that judgment when you have the full picture, because I don't have it at the moment.
We'll agree to disagree, Ray Jones. Thank you.